and then I will share with you some of the ideas that we are going to discuss today with our guests and yes, start the session. So first of all, about the housekeeping rules, please know that there is interpretation available in French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Arabic. You only need to select your language below on the globe. Second, please remain on mute while you are speaking is presenting. And feel free to raise your hand when you have a question or a comment. We at the end will have a Q&A session in which you can actively participate and show your face if you want. So today, our session is addressing one of the critical challenges of our time, which is climate change. I still remember President Macron's idea of we don't have planet B, and this is exactly what is happening. But at the same time, we really need to acknowledge that many people in different countries experience climate change in very, very different ways. So our session today is to really learn from the people who are really struggling with the impacts of climate change in the so-called global south, countries with, despite they are not producing or polluting the environment at great scale, they are experiencing the devastating impacts of climate change. So we have 5 country examples today, all of them from the so-called global south, 3 countries from different areas of Africa, 1 country from Latin America, and 1 country from the South Asia Pacific region. All the presentations will follow the same format. We have kindly asked our guests to talk about 3 main issues. First of all, how climate change had been affected families, communities, and in particular, education infrastructure and the people possibility to enjoy the right to education. The second key theme they are going to discuss today is whether and how governments are investing financial resources to address the critical challenge of climate change in their countries and to secure the right to education in emergency contexts. And the third element they are going to address today is how they are working. I mean, civil society organizations advocating for the right to education and supporting communities in these very countries. So we are going to hear, first of all, the example from Nepal, from Mr. Rangel, from our coalition in Nepal. Then we are going to hear Mrs. Lingari Mihora. Hopefully she is already in the call, from Director of Oxfam Malawi. Then Mr. Tarwat Gate from Egypt. After that break, 5 minutes break, we are going to hear Mrs. Huguet Rakotariboni, CONAMEP. And then we are going to hear Mr. Daniel Yepes Barrio Nuevo from Peru, from our Peruvian campaign for education and world vision. And last but not least, we are going to have the opportunity to hear from our colleagues from the Global Partnership for Education, Ana Maria Tami, a framework for action, how to address these kind of things, very important issues in practice. So welcome you all. I hope you enjoy the session. And with no more preamble, because we have a very tight agenda today, I just want to invite our first speaker, Ran Gair. Ran, thank you for making time for this session, and over to you. Please feel free to share your screen now, and please just deliver your presentation in less than 15 minutes. Thank you. We
Thanks.
see the screen. Thank you, Ran.
Yeah, thanks, Luis. Thank you very much for organizing this webinar, and thanks for you and GCE to invite NC Nepal to be a part of this important webinar and share our experience in terms of effect of the climate change in education and in the community, and also our advocacy efforts in this area. First of all, briefly, NCE is a national coalition of civil society organizations of more than 160 organizations now, and it includes the different stakeholders, civil society stakeholders in Nepal. That includes the teachers, journalists, NGOs, CBOs, and we focused for the evidence-based policy advocacy to ensure the right to education for all. In terms of the climate change, fact, Nepal it's come in 11th position in terms of the earthquake risks. So it is prone areas, and it's in terms of the climate change hazards. So it's comes in the fourth positions globally, and 30th in terms of the flood, because there are different kinds of climate change related, disasters or emergencies, and in mostly in the mountain and the dry areas there is a floodings also. And Kathmandu is a capital city, which is the which the in 21 most vulnerable cities, and in an average one disasters and two death per day. So in so in terms of there are kind of others climate change related disasters like the forest fires and floods, landslides, and heat waves, cold waves, and also there is the other disasters and emergency situations, and mostly these are the climate related, and also the earthquake is also the disasters, and it also affect the livelihoods of the peoples, and ultimately the it impact on the right to educations. And as in the global, and there was also the impact of the COVID-19, it's one of the emergency situations. So the debate of the climate change. So there is gradual, but if we can say that's not much debate on the climate change issues and its impact on the educations or the other people's livelihood. So uh, so there is kind of the most the effect, but the in terms of the debate and the policies, so there is kind of the less priority. So, while opening the speech, as Luis mentioned, as mostly the southern countries, they have the less contribution for the climate or global kind of the emission, but they have the kind of the more impact mm, on the people's life and livelihoods. So Nepal also it's contribute less, but it's Nepal is mostly the agriculture. Dependent, and because of the climate change. Nepal's development agenda also its impact and its impact on the climate dependent agriculture. So kind of there is not the irrigations, so the agriculture is dependent on the rain, so it's depend on the climate change, and because of that there is a delay rain. It's also impact on the the productions, the productivity of the peoples also, and ultimately impact on the climate, impact on the livelihood of the people. So in terms of the climate, climate change impact on the education. So there is a big, if there is the disasters, there is the emergencies. So the peoples, they are displaced, and then they take the shelters of the schools, because it's the only area, safe area. So it also caused the closure of the schools also, and there is a lack of the electronic and online kind of the digital platforms for the student, and that creates the divide, digital divide, mostly in terms of the right to educations. And children who are the who do not have kind of the day meal, so they go to the schools and they get the day meal food, but because of that the once the school is closed, so they are not able to get the day meal, and it's also impact on the nutrition of the kids also. And once the climate, the disasters is there, so there is the risk of the dropout of the student from the schools. Mostly, this is the case of the marginalized and the deprived communities, mostly on the girls and vulnerable communities also. It is because their families, they lost their livelihoods, opportunity, income generating opportunity, and the kids from those families, they are forced to leave the school and go to the other areas to get the income and income generating opportunities also. And mostly the cases within the case of the youth ones, they lost the schools, or they their families, they lost their income generating opportunity, livelihood, and its impact on the psychosocial problems in within the mostly the youth students. And also there is a kind of the increase on the violences, also abuses case also. This mostly on the emergency situation and disaster situation, because there is the less attention from the government's authorities, and because of that, so there is a kind of the violence. So in terms of the policies and government's responses, so governments, there is the disaster risk reduction policy, and also this national climate change policy also we have, and to address the learning and education rights, and to facilitate how to continue the learning within the community. So there is the alternative learning facilitation guideline, mostly on the emergency and disaster situations. And also there is the climate change. Integrate the climate change into the curriculum. The government has the framework to the curriculum adjustment framework. Also, there is the education related emergency works plan, how the government can respond. So mostly the local government, province, and the federal government, how they respond in the emergency situation to continue the education. So it's a education related emergency plan. So, and also the government has a kind of some radio and television programs to aware the community about the possible areas. So, like some areas there is the flood, some areas landslide. So the big considering the types of the emergencies, the government conduct the radio television program to aware the people to be how they can be a safe, and can be a the how they can be prepared to respond the emergencies. And also there is a learning platforms to facilitate the learning and education's opportunity of the student. In terms of the in Nepal, as a civil society response, so we collaborate with the we build the capacity of the civil society, how they can support the community, support the governments also to respond to prepare them and to respond during the emergency. Also, being a network and coalitions, so we collaborate with the different stakeholders, coordinate with them, so that there is kind of the synergy thought in a community. And to volunteers during the emergency and the uh, disasters, we mobilize the youths also, so that they can be a kind of the agent in a community level. They can support the community to respond in the emergency, like also the research and generations to support the policy, so that it is the evidence based, and also kind of to attention to take draw the attention of the government, other stakeholders. We do the appeals to submit the appeal also. And we creates kind of the infographics, so that this can helps to sensitize the community, to sensitize the policy makers, decision maker also. And we collect the video messages from the we collect the voices in a video from the community, so that what the community people they want in terms of the policy, in terms of the programs, or in terms of the implementation kind of things also. And mobilizing the social media, And also in terms of the learning continuations, we do the uh, uh, mobilize the radios or medias, so that there is a kind of the message to the community, or for the policy makers also. And this is just kind of the efforts, NC's efforts. So we do the civil society monitoring during the emergency, mostly on the after the earthquake in 2015 also, and during the emergencies caused by the COVID-19 also. So that the we after the objective of this civil society monitoring is to harmonize how the support from the different stakeholders have outreach to the community also, and whether there is kind of the duplications of in the support, and also what level of the support is provided to the community. This kind of monitoring support the government to respond as accordingly. And in terms of the advocacy and campaigning, so we do the policy discourse dialogues, and we invite the policymakers, mostly the government agencies, those are responsible to respond during the disaster and emergencies, and also the we collect we build the capacity of the community also, community peoples also, and we gathers together in a forums, so that they share the learning and experiences, how they responded during the emergency, and what can be a kind of alternatives to cope for this similar kind of disaster and emergency in future. So we created the dialogues from the different at the different levels, and we also engage with the education clusters. This is the mechanisms to engage different stakeholders like civil society, governments, and other stakeholders, and to plan properly, to respond, to prepare and respond during the emergency. So also the mobilizing the community, empowering them so that they are able to cope. And also and based on the advocacy from the community to the federal national level, and based on our engagement and our experiences, that what we can say that the mapping is most important in terms of the I mean effect of the what, which community or which geographic area is mostly the prone areas in terms of the climate change disasters, climate change induced and emergencies. So this kind of mapping is mostly important, especially for the policymaker, so that they can mobilize the resources as accordingly. And there should be a kind of the proper data, so that the policy is mostly the evidence based, and the support is reached is accordingly. So this should be a kind of the major important factors in terms of the policy making and implementation. But we feel that this part is mostly the lacking part, or there is a poor mapping or a lack of data. So this need to be improved, so that their kind of the adequate response or adequate preparedness, and a well adequate resource is provided to the community, mostly the affected area and affected people. So there should be a kind of the mechanism, so that, as I mentioned, that mostly the youth or the marginalized communities, there is the I mean the mental health concern issues also, I mean psychosocial problems also. To support to provide the counseling, there should be a kind of the mechanism, so that they are well responded, or they are well counseled, or provided the support counsel to them. This kind of mostly for the youth and girls, this is the one. And also there is a less focus of education and emergency related and I mean the aspect or the areas in mostly on the non-formal educations, like community learning centers also, and the integrated them in the teachers training, so that teachers are uh, prepared, and also the they can deliver in the classrooms also, like when they teach, so they can also include this education emergency aspect in their pedagogy also. And mostly it's a need mostly the practical area concern is most, because of the how the people they cope this kind of challenges. So we need to focus mostly on the knowledge and the skills of how to cope with the hazards and disasters. So this kind of aspects also is important, and but we feel this is a less in a priority. So these are some of the gaps in terms of the policy level, or in terms of the practice level, or in terms of the implementation level. So some glimpses of our advocacy and campaigning. So yeah, thank you very much, and I'll be happy to hear and to be a part of discussion. Thanks, Luis.
Thank you. Thank you, Ram. Thank you very much. And I do really appreciate how you bring together the multiple causes and consequences of climate change in the country and the inequalities around that. And also the issue of how it's affecting not just the closure of the school, but further impacts in terms of psychological effects. Now, I don't know, I just want to check if Mrs. Lingari Mihora is in the call, because I don't see her. Are you here, Mr. Lingari, maybe with another name?
No, she's not here, but
Okay.
I am the one presenting on behalf of her.
Okay, brilliant, Iniwe Pihiri. Please just start your presentation now. So we are going to hear now the case of Malawi. Please share your screen.
All right.
Please, only 15 minutes maximum. Thank you very much. Yes, we see the screen. Yeah,
all right,
over to you.
thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right, thank you. So I'll take you through the learning from Malawi. I'll begin with the context that we are working in, how climate change during emergencies have affected education in Malawi. So we've been affected by multi hazards, including floods, stormy rain, strong winds, disease outbreaks. I know we are talking about climate change only, but COVID-19 also had its toll on education. Disasters are a major source of risk for most vulnerable populations here, both disrupting normal way of living, but also education. But further to that, they undermine development gains that have been realized. So I will share you an example of the 2021-2022 cyclone Anna and Gombe. This one here in Malawi affected about 221,000 households, affecting 228 schools across 17 districts. This led to displacement and loss of property and livelihoods, especially also infrastructure, but much to that, disruption to learning. The COVID-19, as I already said, also disrupted the school calendar. There were also closures of schools. This led to fluctuation of learner enrollment, especially in between school terms after the ban was lifted. Just the recent one, we have been hit by Cyclone Freddy. This one affected more than 500,000 people who were displaced, and almost homes were destroyed. It claimed over 510 lives, while hundreds still remain missing up to now. Amongst those fatalities, around 113 were students. So you can see that it really affected us during this just March. The Ministry of Education suspended classes, especially in all the affected districts, 10 which were hardly hit. According to the Malawi Disaster Management Agency, over 273,000 students were out of school. As you might be aware that during disasters in most of Malawian societies, we do not have evacuation centers. So usually we use schools as evacuation centers. So around 390 schools were used as camps. The schools were reopened on 27th March, but up to now, recovery is still going on in the schools. This is including provision of learning materials which were swept off, but also rehabilitation of school structures that were destroyed. In terms of the government effectiveness to provide education during emergencies, we would say that the Ministry of Education is the lead of the education cluster here and is responsible for overall preparedness and emergency response for the education operation. So the ministry collaborates with the local and international organizations, including also the development partners, the UN agencies, especially UNICEF, which support in mobilization of human and financial resources for emergency response. They ensure that teaching and learning continues in all the learning institutions, particularly giving attention to learners with disabilities, those that are injured, and vulnerable children. Once the disaster is declared, then the education cluster stakeholders mobilize resources to support the interventions. I should say that the major challenge is that there is no available funding that the government could use when a disaster strikes. It waits up until there is mobilization of these resources through the education cluster. So this poses a major challenge because the learning mostly is not continued. And even after the disaster, there is also issues of renovation of school structures. Amidst the lack of funding, then this takes long to be in order. So I'll share on what Oxfam has done. There was a project that we did in collaboration with Plan International on enhancing community resilience to hydrometeorological hazards in Malawi. This one was funded by ECHO. So it will give us some learnings because I'll share what exactly happened and the key learnings. The main objective of this project was to address the fundamental challenge of low capacities of institutions, communities in the disaster-prone areas. We were working in 4 of our districts that are prone to disasters here in Malawi, so that they should be able to anticipate, plan, and respond to hydrological, meteorological hazards and disasters. It was targeting only 40 schools. The major beneficiaries were learners, teachers, parents, youth, and communities. As I said that we did this project together with Plan International Malawi. We were also working with other strategic partners, including the Education Technical Working Groups, the Ministry of Education, the Civil Protection Committees, the Department of Disaster Management Affairs, yeah, just to mention a few. We had the 3 result areas. The first one was to increase the disaster preparedness capacities of schools, teachers, learners in the targeted areas that we were working in. We also were looking at reduced education disruptions due to onset of disasters, but also strengthening multi-sector response to natural or man-made disasters. So I will take you through the key achievements that were registered by then. In terms of increasing disaster preparedness of schools, teachers, learners, and communities, we supported development of hazard maps in schools, which assisted in raising awareness on existing potential hazards, both at school and community level, that could trigger disasters, but also that they should be better prepared so that we reduce likely risk by the disasters. In terms of preparedness, we also developed contingency plans for the schools and community. These ones also managed to pre-identify havens or temporary hosts where those people who will be affected by disasters to be in rather than the school communities. But we also assisted in school in community management to collect community level data so that it feeds to the district level data. In terms of learners, making them prepare for disasters, we worked through increasing knowledge of the learners, especially in disaster risk management. These were done through DRR clubs, which were positioned in all the 40 schools to champion knowledge dissemination on DRR, both at the school and the community level. There were also activities on school afforestation. So learners are taking part in planting trees, woodlots around their schools, but also popularizing the DRR source book in primary and secondary schools. We were also prepositioning learning and teaching materials and non-food items, which ensured timely response. So these were prepositioned across the 40 schools. We were also assisting catch-up education to recover lost time, especially during COVID-19 and even when the cyclones hit. This ensured the curriculum acceleration, but also the teachers were trained so that when a disaster strikes, they should be able to deliver catch-up lessons in all the affected schools and even beyond the project lifespan. Through the project, we were able to develop an EIE manual. This one was a guiding tool to teachers, school authorities, and community members during disasters to promote responsive, inclusive, and quality education in emergencies approaches in the schools prone to disasters. But we were also able, through the project, to renovate classrooms so that we avert future disasters and increase safe learning space. As you can see on the pictures, that's a school woodlot. And the below picture was a renovation of classroom block so that it is safe for the learners. Just to mention that under this project, we also had a crisis modifier. This money was prepositioned that whenever there is a disaster that has affected the schools, we should be able to activate it within 74 hours of government declaring a disaster. So through this crisis modifier, we allocated a multi-purpose cash transfer, especially to households that have got learners that were close to the school communities. So under that, we were able to provide the 3,662 households were able to be provided with the multi-purpose cash transfers. So you can see on the left, the multi-purpose cash transfers was could enable the households to better plan on what they can use the money for once the disaster strike. I'll share with you on the key areas where the multi-purpose cash transfers were spent on. We also, through the crisis modifier again, we supported 6,000 learners from the 22 affected schools with learning materials to ensure continuity of learning. So provision of notebooks, provision of blackboards, the movable boards, so that learning should still continue. So once we did the post-distribution monitoring, we saw these findings where recipients were able to show the areas where they use the multi-purpose cash transfers. The first one was allocated to food, and then education, especially purchase of notebooks, school uniforms for household learners, and the household utensils, and finally on shelter materials. In terms of lessons, we register the following lessons. So we learned that with proper preparedness mechanisms and capacity building on DRR for teachers and communities, disruptions to education can be significantly reduced in times of disasters. But also decentralizing or prepositioning of learning and teaching materials is key if timeliness in delivery to affected schools is to be attained. But also the harmonized approach to assessments during disasters brings a unified and integrated response and value for money and efficiency. This is just calling for interagency assessments and coordination, which was there. It ensured that our response was unified. But also our engagement with Ministry of Education officials revealed capacity gap, especially on mainstreaming EIE and disaster risk management to ensure access to quality education. So further investments in capacity building of the Ministry of Education officials in EIE could really go a long way. The project strengthened coordination among village civil protection committee, the schools, but also raising it up to the district protection committees in the targeted districts. In terms of best practices, there are two. The multi-purpose cash transfers as an area response mechanism empowers the recipients to spend the money on their most pressing needs if markets are functioning, but also prepositioning of learning and teaching materials allowed a parallel reduction in education disruptions after the cyclones. In terms of challenges.
The time is over. Please just wrap up in less than 1 minute. Thank you.
Okay, I'll do that. But on the key challenges, I will just mention the major one, that schools continue to be used as a temporary evacuation centers in terms of disasters. In terms of recommendations, we continue to lobby the government to integrate education in emergencies, especially in teacher training curriculum, to promote equitable access to education during shocks. But also humanitarian organizations should work with the Ministry of Education to improve their capacities. Yeah, so briefly, that's what I can say. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dini. We thank you for your presentation. I'm sorry for the timing, but we have several speakers still going. So please, Mr. Tawargate, he will be presenting the case of Egypt. Please share your screen and remind only 15 minutes maximum. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Over to you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I am hello everyone, and I am Sarwat from Egypt. I am member in collection for Egyptian collection for education for oil and the Arab Convention for education for oil in Arab region. Thank you for Global Convention for education for oil to invite me to share with you my presentation about climate change related emergency impact education as an Egypt case study. Firstly, I would like to share with you what I am covering in my presentation. How has the climate change emergency affected education in Egypt and Egyptian measures to comfort climate change in education? What activities have national collection and organization implement promote the right of education emergency emergencies? And the Egyptian educational initiative to green education for firstly, when we talk about climate change, is one of the emergencies that affect education and the virus complaints and access important. And this is a practical time to talk about the effects of climate change in education, especially since we have faced more and many difficult things so far. So we must stand and think about it. Education this time faces many challenges related to comprehensive issues in education system. It is very stage, and it is likely that gender education partner between the public and the private sector, social education emergency in countries, experience, make conflict as well, and information communication technology are one of the first concern and priorities in the next step. In addition, that effect with climate change is one from important thing to face it now. How have climate change emergencies affected education in Egypt? Regarding for education to face climate change before during the COVID-19 period and what the COVID pandemic showed, special procedures and the related facing the crisis, using effective strategies to pandemic concerns and the server level of education in the following this area. Plans and mechanisms to face crisis, resources and the infrastructure, community awareness. Several the Egyptian state has adopted many strategies, especially to initiative in the regards the strategy for green education to face the climate change. Egyptians have many efforts to face the climate change this time, as they make many efforts every year towards the green economy, but direct billions pounds the general budget to every physical year in the field, and they even increase this allocation year after year. In the fiscal year 2021, the government directed about 15 of the budget for the state investment plan for green project, while the present double in following year 21-22 to 30%, while the government aims to correct year budget 22-23 is direct about 14%, raising the slogan green in the state investment plan. According to the report issued by Minister of Planning and Economic Development on the state investment plan to correct fiscal year 22-23 was directed to the Parliament Plan and the Budget Committee. And towards this green economic path, Egypt has launched many green strategies. And later, I will talk about 5 strategies as Egypt to use to face the climate change till 2050. Within the framework, especially after the COP27 climate change in Egypt conference between 6 to 18 November 22, among the most important global events which attracted the participation and interests for all countries of the world. The summit came at all countries of the world are affected by climate change, and its negative effect was required to countries of the world to unite to reduce the gender phenomenon, especially educational frameworks. Egypt launched the 5 strategy to confront climate change, in which education was the main focus in every step for strategy. These are 5 strategies in Egypt. Integration, the first one, integrated and sustainable energy strategy 2035, a green economy strategy management in the development of water resource 2015, and water installation strategy 2015, and the national strategy for green hydrogen. Within the framework is key important implement Egypt Vision 2030 with aims in the reduce emission and the reduce population to implementing a clean, sustainable, and environment-friendly product. What about the level of education coming with the effects of climate change in Egypt? At the level of curriculum, Egypt has designed many subjects that deal with climate change and converting it, as well as practice and produce that inspire awareness more students about confirming climate change. At the level of preparing and qualifying teacher, building their capacities in green education issues, how to preserve their environment and using the simplest means and the message to transfer this education to the students. Community awareness through the use of a green message to all the social media tools, television channels, to read or paper and newspapers. At the level on infrastructure, Egypt has made many efforts to prepare the infrastructure to predict any effective to climate change. This preparation has focused on building a environment, autonomy, internet tools, and internet as a level budget and resource, in which Egypt has allocated many resources to face these changes. What about the civil society organization in Egypt and how working together to face climate change? There is many organizations that have pursued program and project related to greening and preserving the environment. These are also groups of local, regional, and international organizations working together to contribute to facing the effect of climate change. Regional network also are a group for networks that work together at a regional level to build a green project and initiative related to green education and how to explain applicable strategy, informal and non-formal education. For example, the Arab House for Learning and Development Act, which includes 4 regional networks that is the level of Arab region, which always seeks to contribute between these network on issues related to policies, including message and produce related to green education and contributing for climate change. After the education transformation summit that results in recommendation, the Egypt adopted this very important working on the climate change strategy, interaction and sensible injury strategy, water resource management and the development strategy, and the safe water desalination strategy, and the green hydrogen strategy. About education, Egyptian education, and what about the activities now to climate impact of education? In light of the TED of participation of the COP27 summit, there was a clear presence and participation by Ministry of Education and the Technical Education, the Minister of Dr. Reda Hagazi, integration of many topics of climate change and the effective in various curricular and exploration organized by students, through which they express climate change and effective, and it is impact on the world around them. About 1,000 students participated in implementation of 1,700 initiatives related for the green education. What about the challenges we face in climate change in Egypt? We have many challenges, like lack of administrative capacity to various levels, lack of comprehensive data and provides solid basic planning and actions, lack of awareness about the need to prepare the teachers and prepare or how deal with the emergency, lack of commitment of the stakeholders, lack of budget to emergency response, lack of public awareness, and poor acceptance of crisis management plan. But we are working to be more effective these days, and partnership between the government and the NGOs in Egypt, like develop capacity for educational principle and the school management committees and manage education to emergencies, to prepare teachers for teaching in emergency, to carry out large cycle awareness campaign and the education emergency, develop an emergency response to plan at the society's level, encouraging education curriculum to emergency situation. Egyptian initiative to green education and to convert to climate change, the concept of education in emergency and why the concern, the relationship and the impact of emergency, which is a subject of education. We have some recommendation to work on to face the climate change now, and this working between the government and the local organization and other national and international organization in Egypt, including topic the curriculum on emergency natural disasters and trauma management, raise awareness among the students regarding emergencies. Teacher education and the training curriculum should include providing to enable to teacher to address education in emergency. And the disaster management plan should include mechanism for providing respiration to education. And the educational issues as a valuable tool of private sector and will intensify and information made available to all. Transparent and clear rules must be divided in the education sector to allow the use of the private sector inputs. Professional government encourage private education at the school level as an option for those who can afford a common curriculum framework to general as well as financial education should be applied to educational institution in both the public and private. That's what I wanted to share with you. Thank you so much for hearing.
Sorry. Thank you, Tarwar. Thank you very much. There is something happening. 1 second. Okay, maybe now. Thank you, Tarwar. Thank you very much. Perfect timing. Lots of interesting ideas that I am sure our members will discuss at the end in the Q&A. So now I will give the floor to Madagascar, Huguette. Please share your screen. Huguette? Hi, Huguette.
D'accord. Attendez juste un petit instant parce que je vais faire rapide. OK? Attendez. Je partage pas encore mon écran parce que je sais pas. Je n'ai pas ouvert le. Je vais ouvrir.
Okay, Huguette, thank you very much.
Ouais, just a few minutes. Okay?
I see you, Huguette, but not your screen.
Oui, j'ai pas vu le. Je me suis perdue pour voilà, c'est ça que je voudrais partager. Attendez, c'est ça. Voilà. Partage d'écran.
Hopefully, yes.
Et aussi, vous voyez?
Voilà.
Vous voyez?
Yeah.
Oui, attendez.
Go ahead, Huguette. We are seeing YouTube video. Yeah? That's it what you want to check?
Oui, c'est sur YouTube que je voudrais partager. Puis après, je vais partager un document.
Good.
D'accord? Mais je suis en train de chercher le document.
Perfect, Huguette. Go ahead. Please remind the time. 15 minutes. Okay.
Oui. De 15 minutes. Je ne vais pas aller au-delà de 15 minutes, ne vous en faites pas. OK? On peut y aller maintenant. Attendez. Ah, j'ai perdu encore le partage d'écran. Bonjour à tous, vous m'entendez? Un bonjour de Madagascar. Voilà, je vais vous présenter une courte situation de ce que nous avons vécu.
Huguette, the video is not playing.
Sorry?
We don't see the video. Just
Ah, d'accord.
bottom. Yeah,
Ah, d'accord.
play it, please.
D'accord, d'accord, d'accord.
Brilliant, thank you.
Voilà. Voilà. Là, vous voyez?
Voilà.
Vous voyez?
Yes.
Là?
Après le passage de crédit, la désolation en Madagascar. Le cyclone affaibli, mais porté par des rafales de vent, a frappé les côtes est du pays mardi soir. Plusieurs morts sont à déplorer. Avant, nous avions peur de rafales de vent. Maintenant, c'est plus la montée des eaux qui fait peur. En plus, notre maison se trouve en bas d'un pont. Nous avons peur de l'inondation. Nous avons fui le cyclone et les religieuses d'ici nous ont accueillis car notre maison n'est pas solide. C'est une maison qui est déjà soutenue par des rondants. Comme cette femme, 8 personnes ont été déplacées préventivement. La majorité devrait pouvoir retourner rapidement chez eux, même si l'électricité n'a pas encore été rétablie. Mais plus de 3300 maisons ont été inondées et presque autant endommagées. Le cyclone est passé auparavant au large de la région, moins dévastateur que redouté. Si la trajectoire du cyclone prédit est atypique, Madagascar, l'un des pays les plus pauvres au monde, n'est pas pour autant étranger aux phénomènes météorologiques extrêmes. La ville de Mandjari, de 25 000 habitants, où Freddy a touché terre, a été largement détruite l'an dernier par le cyclone Batiral. 135 personnes avaient alors trouvé la mort.
C'est ce que je vous ai montré, tout a été déjà dit. Je vais vous parler maintenant comment les urgences liées au changement climatique ont affecté l'éducation dans notre pays. Est-ce que vous voyez le texte que je suis en train de partager là? Hey! Hey!
We only see the video and now it's gone, so you need to change something.
Ah!
Il faut partager
D'accord.
l'autre.
Je vais arrêter donc. Voilà. Vous voyez?
Yeah, now yes, you get. Go ahead.
OK, yes, oui. Donc, Madagascar, comme nous l'avons vu, excusez-moi, vous concentrez, vous écoutez, hein? Madagascar, comme vous l'avez vu, était en première ligne de la crise climatique. Donc, il y avait eu des millions de personnes qui sont confrontées à une perte, mais apparemment, il y a la sécheresse d'une ampleur catastrophique et en but de violation des droits de la vie, de l'éducation, la paix, la nourriture et l'eau. Il y a même un risque très grave de l'augmentation de mortalité à Madagascar. Voilà ce qui s'était en train de produire. Ça n'a pas épargné les systèmes éducatifs qui ne sont pas à l'abri du changement climatique dans la grande île. Il y a l'inondation du niveau de la mer, surtout dans le Moyen-Ouest et l'Ouest, affectant les lieux de vie. S'il vous plaît, excusez-moi. Excusez-moi, il y a des personnes qui parlent de moi. Merci. Les températures n'arrête pas de monter, ça engendre la sécheresse.
Please, there is a reminder that everyone just close the micro when you are not speaking. So go ahead, Huguet, and sorry about that. Go ahead, Huguet, please.
Donc, il y a beaucoup de dysfonctionnements. On peut dire même qu'au cours des 35 dernières années, à Madagascar, plus de 5 millions d'enfants ont été touchés, n'ont pas eu l'occasion de bénéficier de leurs droits fondamentaux par 46 catastrophes qui n'a pas épargné l'intensification du changement climatique dans le pays. Cela a affecté la destruction, les infrastructures scolaires à travers les 22 régions du pays. Les dernières années, il y a une région qui a connu des saisons de pluie inférieures à la moyenne. Ça, c'est l'inverse. S'il y a beaucoup d'eau, mais il y avait eu une région qui a connu des saisons de pluie inférieures à la moyenne et qui a une baisse sévère de la production de denrées alimentaires de base, notamment le riz et le manioc, qui est la base de notre alimentation, ainsi même qu'une diminution de la taille et une dégradation de l'état des troupeaux. En termes de l'affectation du changement climatique, Madagascar a une forte taux de perte au niveau social et au niveau économique dans ce point. Je passe directement dans la deuxième partie. Les politiques gouvernementales, est-ce qu'elles ont été efficaces pour fournir une éducation pendant, après les situations d'urgence, surtout pendant les changements climatiques? Nous voyons bien qu'il y a les changements climatiques à Madagascar, mais ça entraîne aussi une variété de pandémies, par exemple, je dirais la choléra. À Madagascar, il y a aussi encore la peste et la tuberculose. Donc, Madagascar fait partie d'une liste peu enviable lorsque on demande question de changement climatique, parce que notre pays figure parmi les 10 pays les plus à risque face à ce problème, peut-être au niveau de l'Afrique, mais je pense que c'est au niveau mondial. En somme, notre gouvernement n'a pas baissé les bras, mais notre gouvernement a déjà mis en place des mesures afin de lutter contre les problèmes environnementaux il y a bien des années, parce que nous recevons au minimum 5 à 6, 7 cyclones tropicaux chaque année. Pour éviter l'impact du changement climatique, le gouvernement a mis un programme de cantine scolaire dans le cadre de l'amélioration de l'accès à l'éducation primaire. C'est au niveau primaire dont on parle, parce que le changement climatique est source de malnutrition et de mortalité, hausse de mortalité infantile dans le pays. Donc, les élèves vont se concentrer en classe et ceci entre dans le cadre de l'encouragement pour qu'il n'y ait pas d'abondance scolaire. C'est ça une stratégie que le gouvernement a adoptée. Il y a aussi différents programmes qui ont été exposés et mis en œuvre afin d'aider à atténuer les impacts négatifs de la crise climatique et réduire le nombre, mais on ne peut pas réduire le nombre de cyclones, donc on ne peut pas réduire les sécheresses, mais on a déjà mis une campagne d'études d'adduction d'eau, mais ça a commencé, mais jusqu'à maintenant, il y a le pipeline que le gouvernement actuel est en train de mettre en œuvre. En partenariat donc avec certaines organisations internationales, le gouvernement a créé le Bureau national de coordination du changement climatique relevant du ministère de l'écologie et des forêts. À travers son programme de construction d'écoles, il y a eu une concertation avec les ministères tutelle de l'éducation. Donc, le ministère de l'éducation a la responsabilité d'identifier des emplacements sûrs pour la construction et l'extension des infrastructures, l'adoption des mesures de construction capables en normes pour supporter les catastrophes, c'est-à-dire dans des zones à haut risque. Et le ministère aussi a déjà commencé à reviser le calendrier scolaire pour l'aligner sur les saisons agricoles et météorologiques. Ça, c'était inscrit dans le plan sectoriel de l'éducation à Madagascar qui va prendre fin pour cette année 2023 et on saura la suite après le changement du plan sectoriel. En ce qui concerne l'accès pendant les saisons de pluie, on a adopté le ministère a commencé timidement à adopter l'introduction de l'apprentissage numérique en partenariat avec UNICEF, UNESCO et bien d'autres organisations internationales. On n'a pas encore les données probantes par rapport à cette initiative. En dernier lieu, je veux parler ce que nous, la coalition nationale de Madagascar, ce que nous avons fait, ce que nous avons promis pour participer, pour contribuer à l'atténuation du changement climatique affectant le système éducatif. Nous sommes convaincus de l'importance de respect de la promotion du droit fondamental qui est l'éducation. Donc, dans les contextes d'urgence, nous avons mis un projet de renforcement de la résilience du système éducatif face aux éventuelles pandémies, parce que la pandémie à Madagascar, comme je les ai cités tout à l'heure, pas seulement la pandémie, nous avons déjà vu la pandémie Covid, mais nous aussi, on a notre pandémie, par exemple, l'invasion des criquets. Il y a l'invasion des criquets, ça entraîne aussi beaucoup de maladies parce qu'on tue les criquets avec des insecticides, pesticides, et les enfants ramassent et les fait griller. Et ça tue beaucoup d'enfants. Les risques associés donc à la fermeture d'école sont l'augmentation de vulnérabilité sociale et ça entraîne aussi une difficulté pour les collectivités décentralisées parce qu'il y a les difficultés au niveau des ménages en termes de finances. Il y a le manque de vivres qui constitue aussi un risque à la déconcentration des enfants pour suivre l'apprentissage numérique à la maison. Ce projet que nous avons élaboré et que nous avons déjà mis en œuvre donne suite à la répartition égale d'abord, à la répartition égale de la technologie de l'information et de la communication. Donc, nous avons priorisé la formation des enseignants, la formation des parents d'élèves, l'apport en termes de contribuer à la déconcentration des enfants, en termes d'apport de vivre. Donc, pour assurer la performance des enseignants, nous avons fait la formation des enseignants. Nous avons mis en évidence les mères de famille parce que dans la société malgache, on voit bien une hausse taux de familles monoparentales avec des femmes, chefs de famille. Donc, nous avons mis ces femmes-là, femmes monoparentales avec les enseignants, comme actrices incontournables dans l'apprentissage numérique pour la continuité de l'éducation en cas de crise. 3 types d'actions sont priorisés par notre projet que nous avons déjà mis en œuvre. Il y a la formation, l'accompagnement, l'outil, la dotation pour les enseignants pour intégrer les outils numériques dans le suivi des progrès des élèves à la maison. Et nous avons fait aussi l'effort de faire une dotation de support numérique en termes de kits solaires parce que Madagascar est un pays à un faible taux d'électrification. Et afin de garantir le bien-être des élèves, nous avons priorisé la continuité du cantine scolaire. Merci, mesdames et messieurs, pour votre attention. Je suis à votre disposition pour des questions de clarification. Merci.
Thank you, Huguette. Thank you very much. So now, according to the agenda, we have a 5 minutes break. So, and then we are going to hear Daniel Lopez from Peru and Ana Maria Tamini presenting the framework from GPE. So see you in 5 minutes. Thank you. Hi everyone, welcome back. The 5 minutes break is over. Thank you for waiting. And now we are going to give the floor to Mr. Daniel Yepes Barrio Nuevo from Peru, presenting the case of Peru. Over to you, Daniel, and please feel free to share your screen.
Muchas gracias, Luis. Buenos días por este lado del mundo. Buenos días y con todas y con todos. Nosotros, como organización, como World Vision Perú, somos parte de la campaña peruana por el derecho a la educación, ¿no? Es una campaña que está formada por más de 27 organizaciones. Y algunas de estas organizaciones realizamos acciones en el marco de la educación en emergencia. Lo que yo voy a compartir ahora es la experiencia reciente que hemos tenido como país ante eventos naturales que han producido una serie de situaciones catastróficas en muchos lugares de Perú. Y como contexto, quiero mencionar de que estos últimos meses Perú ha estado viviendo, producto del cambio climático, con eventos como sequías. Las últimas semanas, por ejemplo, se ha dado algunas nevadas inusuales que ha generado la pérdida de muchas cosechas en distintas partes del país, sobre todo en zonas altas, en la cordillera de los Andes. Pero uno de los eventos que más nos ha afectado como país es el ciclón Yaku y el fenómeno del niño costero, que es un inusual calentamiento del Océano Pacífico, donde el agua se evapora en grandes cantidades y se condensa, ¿no es cierto?, al llegar a la sierra y luego genera lluvias inusuales, sobre todo en la zona costera del país. Esto produce una serie de inundaciones y también deslizamientos de tierra que en el país se le conoce como huaicos. Esta situación que hemos vivido, sobre todo los meses de enero, febrero, marzo, ¿no?, y parte de abril, ha generado en el país más de 100 muertos, existen 239.669 damnificados. En cuanto al servicio educativo, 624 escuelas han sido afectadas, ¿no?, parcial o totalmente. Son 5.331 escuelas que están en posibilidades de ser afectados ante este tipo de eventos y por lo tanto están siendo monitoreados. Y en el mes de marzo, que inician las labores escolares para más de 8 millones de niños, niñas y adolescentes, en el mes de marzo y abril casi 2 millones de niños y niñas no podían retornar a la escuela presencial por esta situación. Esto genera una afectación directa al derecho a la educación de los niños, niñas y adolescentes, porque no pueden acceder, porque sus locales escolares han sido afectados muy seriamente y por lo tanto no pueden iniciar las labores. Algunas escuelas, como lo que hemos escuchado hace un momento de colegas, me parece, de Madagascar, ha sido, algunas escuelas son utilizadas como albergues temporales y eso afecta también el derecho a la educación. Pero también está habiendo un problema de seguridad alimentaria a nivel país por todo lo que está sucediendo. Se retrasa el inicio de la escolaridad presencial. Está habiendo afectación socioemocional, que es un tema importante que se debe tocar cuando se producen estos eventos y sobre todo cuando se mira el ejercicio del derecho a la educación. Ante esta situación, el Estado peruano ha reaccionado a partir de marcos de política pública con la declaratoria de emergencia, ¿no es cierto?, de la educación en emergencia, sobre todo en las zonas donde están ocurriendo estos eventos naturales y producto de estos eventos naturales, las catástrofes que estamos viendo. Se está dando un monitoreo de escuelas afectadas, por eso sabemos que son más de 5.000 escuelas que están en riesgo de ser afectadas en su infraestructura. Hay un liderazgo desde el Ministerio de Educación para la gestión de riesgos y desastres donde participamos distintas organizaciones de la sociedad civil En lo posible se ha activado una educación remota. Digo en lo posible porque hay muchas zonas donde el tema de la conectividad o acceso de tecnología es muy limitado. Mas, sin embargo, desde el Estado existe una deficiencia en la cultura de la prevención y la planificación, ¿no? O sea, siempre se está atendiendo a la emergencia, a veces de manera no muy orgánica, ¿no es cierto?, muy desorganizada, y que retrasa las medidas para recuperar las escuelas y, por lo tanto, el derecho a la educación. En este contexto, ¿qué es lo que hacen organizaciones como la que represento ahora en este espacio, como World Vision, y otras organizaciones que también trabajan en esta línea? Pues actuamos en tres diferentes momentos, ¿no? Un primer momento es identificar estas escuelas que están siendo afectadas y el número de niños, niñas y comunidad educativa damnificada, porque no es solamente la niñez quien está siendo afectada, hay toda una comunidad que tiene que ver con familias, con docentes que están siendo damnificados. Implica, una vez identificadas estas escuelas, establecer coordinaciones desde la mesa que dirige el Ministerio de Educación, coordinaciones con el Ministerio de Educación a nivel nacional y a nivel subnacional, y también con otras organizaciones del Estado peruano, para poder responder ante estas situaciones de emergencia, en coordinación también con otras organizaciones de la cooperación internacional, como es el caso de UNICEF, Save the Children, Plan Internacional, etcétera, 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 ¿no? Eso sucede en un primer momento. Y en un segundo momento, lo que se da es actuar para poder habilitar el servicio educativo. Y el actuar tiene que ver básicamente con la remoción de escombros y habilitación física de las escuelas. En el caso de World Vision Perú, nosotros hemos actuado para rehabilitar 20 escuelas, ¿no? Y que puedan iniciar lo más pronto posible sus actividades escolares. Y en un momento 3, viene el monitoreo al inicio, del servicio educativo de estas escuelas, capacitación a docentes, que se ha mencionado mucho en las participaciones anteriores que se escucharon. En el caso nuestro, tuvimos la posibilidad de capacitar a 639 docentes de estas 20 escuelas, para que brinden soporte socioemocional, porque ese es un elemento importante a considerar cuando suceden estas situaciones. Se han entregado maletas de soporte emocional que tiene que ver con un conjunto de materiales lúdicos que permita a los maestros tener actividades también desde esa lógica lúdica al iniciar sus actividades escolares. En total, hemos beneficiado desde esta experiencia a 11.390 niños, niñas y adolescentes que han recibido distintas acciones de protección y soporte socioemocional una vez habilitadas las escuelas para su funcionamiento. Una reflexión final que nosotros tenemos es que no siempre podemos estar actuando desde la lógica de emergencia. Necesitamos implementar una cultura de la prevención. Y esta cultura de la prevención pasa por la formación, por sensibilizar a la comunidad educativa en temas del cuidado medioambiental para hacer frente a la crisis climática. Pero también pasa por elaborar planes de gestión de riesgo en las escuelas y las comunidades. De hecho, la política pública educativa en el país exige la elaboración de estos planes de gestión en las escuelas, pero no siempre estos planes responden a las necesidades que se tienen en contexto, y no siempre es dialogado desde toda la comunidad educativa, donde los propios niños, niñas, adolescentes, las familias participen en la reflexión y en la elaboración de estrategias para prevenir y actuar cuando sucedan estas situaciones que ponen en emergencia la educación y el bienestar de los niños, niñas y adolescentes. Muchísimas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Daniel. Thank you very much for joining us today and for your presentation. So now we are going to the last presentation today, and then we will have time for a Q&A. So I welcome Mrs. Ana Maria Tami from the Global Partnership for Education. Over to you, Ana Maria, and please feel free to show your screen.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon and evening, everybody. I'm delighted to be here with you, and thank you for all the previous presenters. It's been really rich listening to your experiences. So let me share my screen here. I'm trying to make it full screen. I think this should work. Perfect. So hello, everybody. Again, my name is Ana Maria Tami. I'm the thematic lead for education in crisis and conflict settings at the Global Partnership for Education Secretariat. So I'll talk today to you about a framework for action that we recently launched, which is around supporting climate smart education systems. We've heard a lot today already about how climate change affects education, so I won't run you through this slide in detail. The only thing I'll mention here is that at a global level, we see that almost half of all children across the world live in countries that are classified as extremely high risk to the impacts of climate change. And that data is from UNICEF's Children's Climate Risk Index. So we're really seeing the impacts of climate change across the 90 GPE partner countries that we work with, and that's really what's motivating our work in this area. So what we see as climate smart education systems, we see that there are three goals that basically are pursued by climate smart education systems. So the first goal is protecting and advancing quality, relevant, and equitable education. And we've already heard today about how all these initiatives across the world are doing exactly that when climate-driven disasters are striking. The second goal is that it's important for education systems also to protect the planet and the environment, which is supporting all of our countries, all of our communities. So thinking about how education can be provided in ways that supports the environment on which we depend. And the third goal of climate smart education systems is to promote climate justice. And by this, I mean that there are vulnerabilities that make some children more affected to climate change and more impacted. So it's really important that our approach to building climate smart education systems addresses those deep-rooted inequalities in education systems. And a few words about how this aligns with GPE's strategy for 2025. We are accelerating access, learning outcomes, and gender equality across the countries that we work in. And we do that through supporting equitable, inclusive, and resilient education systems that are fit for the 21st century. So we really see that this work around climate change and climate smart systems really helps us to move the needle on these resilient education systems. So the 7 dimensions of this framework for action I'll present in a moment. But basically, this framework is coming from a rich background paper that we commissioned, and it was authored by Dr. Fumio Kagawa from Sustainability Frontiers, and it was based on a lot of work done by UNICEF South Asia. And so it's building on a lot of rich work in the sector, let's say. And on some of the objectives of the framework. So firstly, this framework, it tries to maximize the complementarity between some of the approaches that we are seeing on climate resilience and climate action and climate justice that currently we see as a little bit siloed and disconnected. So we're trying to bring those approaches together in this kind of framework at a system level. So one of the things the framework does is it outlines potential entry points within national education systems that can strengthen the resilience and the relevance of education to climate change. It also highlights the opportunities to leverage the role of education in the wider climate change efforts, because oftentimes we see that education is not featured in those wider conversations that countries are having on disaster risk and climate adaptation that may be happening in ministries outside of the Ministry of Education. The framework also identifies gaps in evidence and in practice and highlights some of the existing approaches and frameworks that are related to these 7 dimensions that can support policymakers, planners, and practitioners to build climate smart systems. So here you see the 7 dimensions of the framework. At the outside of the circle here, you have kind of enabling factors. And these are data and evidence, policy and planning, coordination, and finance. And then after that, you have 2 inputs to the education system, those being infrastructure and teaching and learning. And those are kind of 2 key areas where there are many, many ways in which to embed this climate smart thinking. And finally, in the center, you have schools and communities, which of course are not only affected by climate change, but they are also agents, and they have a really important role to play in climate action themselves. And across this circle here, you see that gender equality is really cross-cutting throughout and needs to be considered in all of these 7 dimensions. I won't go too much into detail on gender because I know we're short on time, but to mention at a high level that there is a 2-way relationship between gender and climate change. So firstly, of course, climate change poses a real threat to gender equality in education because it exacerbates the pre-existing equity gaps. However, there is also a really positive association between girls' education and resilience to climate change and more effective climate action. So girls and women are very important to overall enhancing resilience of communities. And we see that when women are participating in civil society action, in politics, this does have beneficial environmental outcomes. So I'll go now briefly through each of the 7 dimensions, noting the time. So I may not address everything on these slides, but I'll be happy to share my presentation, and I'll also put the link to the actual framework in the chat so you can see all of this later. So in terms of the first dimension around data and evidence, here are some of the key points that are the entry points, basically. So firstly is that the Ministry of Education has timely access and capacity to use the data, which supports risk reduction and preparedness. And I heard a lot of the speakers talking about the fact that this data is oftentimes lacking. And really, we do see it as a key requirement in order to support that preparedness and see where schools are built and so forth. Data also needs to be disaggregated by gender, by other inequities, by age, so that we can better address the specific needs and the vulnerabilities related to climate change, because we know that it has different impacts depending on different groups of children and different ages. It's also important to look at things like the Education Management Information System has very useful data, but it might not capture everything. And so there may be other data systems in the EIE kind of world, or let's say in the health and nutrition sectors that may have really important information related to climate change impacts. So looking at kind of comprehensively what data is available in the country. One example that I wanted to share from Philippines is that they have actually launched this disaster risk reduction and management information system. And this consists of 3 tools. There's a rapid damage assessment, some student-led hazard mapping, and online school safety resources as well. So you'll see when you look at the framework that there's a lot of country examples from across the world, and we tried to look at low-income countries in particular. And so I really invite you to look at that and see, look at the examples from your own regions and the relevant context to you. Moving on to policy and planning. So here, there's a few points I wanted to mention. Firstly, that it's very important for education sector planning to be crisis sensitive, not just to the risk of climate change, but looking at all the hazards and all the risks that exist in the country that can possibly impact the education system and children. On the flip side, education also needs to be reflected in the efforts toward climate action and climate change more broadly. And we really see that this is not happening, for example, in national adaptation plans, nationally determined contributions, which countries develop for the COP conference. Education is still not very reflected in those kinds of plans. So that's somewhere we need to really work to elevate education, both to highlight the impacts of climate change on education, but also to make other sectors understand about how education is really a solution to climate change as well. Cambodia is kind of a model example in this regard, because their document of nationally determined contribution actually clearly articulates the contribution that education makes to these wider climate change efforts, and specifically through curriculum, through climate resilient school infrastructure, and through the role that young people play in climate action. The third dimension of the framework is coordination. And so here it's important for there to be coordination mechanisms between the different authorities in the country that are responsible for education, climate change, environment, and disaster management. Not all of those might have their own ministry, but there are all often different types of authorities. And already in the presentations, we kind of heard that there might be a disaster risk agency or management agency. And so it's important basically for those authorities to jointly assess and have kind of joint planning to this risk of climate change. And the second point here is just that the Ministry of Education really needs to be represented when those decisions are made about national climate adaptation. And finally, joined up coordination between humanitarian development actors is obviously really key, given the work spans kind of emergency response and recovery and preparedness and long-term system development in the education sector. One example to share here is from the Kyrgyz Republic, which has actually set up a multi-sector coordination mechanism, which ensures that climate change considerations are mainstreamed across all the national economic and environmental policies. Finance is the last enabling factor. And here, the point I really want to stress is that given that there are important co-benefits of investing both in education and in climate, and education is really this solution to climate change, we need to be thinking about how we can possibly unlock some of the international climate financing sources for education and explore sources of financing like disaster risk financing, which is used in other sectors, I believe, like agriculture, but not so much in education yet. And there are also important considerations to be made, thinking about how domestic financing of education can be equitable, and how it can be monitored in terms of how education is spent on climate-related issues. Haiti, we have an example of a project which is funded by the Adaptation Fund, which looks at retrofitting schools and enhancing disaster risk awareness. And Adaptation Fund actually is not at all an education-related fund, but rather funds climate adaptation across the world. So it's one of the examples of this kind of cross-sector approach. So now moving on to the two inputs, let's say, to the education system, first of them being infrastructure. Some of the really important points I wanted to say here are around having in place a regulatory framework for school infrastructure that basically outlines some of the, let's say, climate considerations we want to see to make schools
Sorry,
safe.
Maria, the time is over. Please, could you grow up in 1 minute? Thank you.
1 minute. Okay.
Yeah, thank
Wonderful.
you. It's a challenge. Good.
Okay. So teaching and learning is really, of course, key to everything. So we want to see that climate change is embedded across the curriculum in an interdisciplinary manner, that there are pedagogy and standards around this, that student assessment practices reflect kind of behavior change as well, in addition to scientific knowledge. Schools and communities are super central to this because they play such a role as connecting hubs, sharing information. There's, indigenous communities that really can contribute knowledge to resilience and climate change. So involving communities is of course really central, and there's many examples of building these school and community-based platforms that can really have a large impact. For example, in Zambia, where they reached, where youth reached over the 1 million other peers. So just some final thoughts. Education has a really critical role to play in both climate resilience and climate action. And so this framework provides an integrated framework to maximize some of these co-benefits in the sector. And we really hope it's useful to you. And I invite you to read it further and look at all the rich examples that are within the framework. And I'll drop the link in the chat here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ana Maria. Thank you very much for showing us all the details of this very interesting framework. I am sure it will be useful for our members. So now I want to invite all to be part of the Q&A. So you just need to raise your hand to ask a question or a comment. And also you can write on the chat box. I see already a question. This question is for Ana Maria, and it was raised by Jennifer Rick from the GCE US. And she was wondering if GPE please consider adding disability inclusive education, more specifically to ensure that people with disabilities are fully included. Oh, Jennifer, you are here. So if you want to clarify something about the question, please feel free.
No, Luis Eduardo, that was perfect. Exactly. I think our colleagues earlier mentioned this in particular, right? And from a data desegregation standpoint, gender as well as disability is so critical to make sure that we're really truly reaching everybody in need, and especially with thinking about climate smart education strategies and DRR, disaster risk reduction strategies. Doing so proactively with leadership from GPE would make a huge difference in this space. You're already at GPE doing a lot on gender equity and equality and girls' education topics, which we're so grateful for, but gender transformative, disability inclusive education becomes so vital, both when we're thinking about and looking at the children and youth, especially who are currently left out of school, and those who are most likely to be at risk with increasing impacts on the climate front. But then on the flip side, right, they can, when we get this right and truly make sure that not just girls, but people with disabilities, DPOs, organizations of persons with disabilities, are at those planning and implementation and policymaking tables as well, then it can really boost the economic recovery, all of the possibilities for community development driven by education. So we'd be happy to help with that integration. Just wanted to ask if you'd be open in future presentations to making that more clear that you're looking at other aspects, not just gender. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jennifer. Ana Maria, you want to say something about this question comment by
just
Jennifer?
very briefly. No, thanks so much, Jennifer, for raising that really critical aspect. And I'm sorry there wasn't time to unpack like all the different aspects that we are considering in the framework. But I think what you're mentioning is really critical when we talk about kind of one of the goals of the framework, which is or goals of climate smart education systems, which is around climate justice. And of course, one of the inequities that exists is around children with disabilities. So we have tried to integrate that throughout the framework. And for example, when we talk about the infrastructure standards for schools, those need to be designed in a way that they are allowing access to children with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Ana Maria. Now I want to invite Livani Nazapato. Please go ahead, Livani, with your question.
Thank you very much to all the presenters for the good presentation. I wanted to ask, especially in relation to the online learning that is often provided during emergencies. I know that one of the challenges that we had in Malawi was that the Ministry of Education introduced online learning, but then because of challenges in access, especially in rural areas where you don't have electricity, poor families where they don't have these gadgets, the online learning only served those in town. And in the end, it was widening the inequalities. So in light of the framework that has been provided by Anne-Marie, how best can we minimize this, the digital divide when we introduce online learning? Maybe we could also have examples from Peru, but I wanted really to see how this framework can help to minimize, because otherwise it will widen the inequalities further, although remote learning is appreciated. Thank you.
So who want to be first, Ana Maria, and then Danielle is okay? Addressing this question.
Sure. No, thanks really for the really important question and highlighting this digital divide. I have to say the framework is at a pretty high level. And so it's trying to bring this kind of systems approach to addressing the issue of climate change in and through education. And so there wasn't really scope for it to be very detailed on all the types of interventions that could possibly be taken to increase preparedness of systems and for them to be able to respond better. And so it doesn't, unfortunately, provide this detail, for example, on addressing the digital divide. So we would look at other materials that are out there in the sector to address questions like that.
Thank you, Ana Maria. Daniel, do you want to comment on Limbani's question?
Yo quiero mencionar un poco la experiencia de Perú, ¿no? Que tuvimos esta propuesta para hacer frente a la pandemia de educación remota utilizando tecnología y conectividad. Y para que exista una educación de este tipo tiene que haber esas condiciones, ¿no? O sea, el acceso a tecnología y el acceso a conectividad. En el caso peruano no siempre ha sido adecuado y eso más bien agranda las brechas de aprendizaje que existe sobre todo en sectores más vulnerables, más rurales. Quizá como reflexión final, la necesidad de que para esta práctica tiene que asegurarse condiciones de acceso a conectividad y de acceso a tecnología y sobre todo, ¿no? Capacitación de los docentes para el uso de la tecnología, pero también sensibilización a las familias para que puedan hacer uso de las mismas, ¿no? Eso, gracias.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you very much. I invite other people to just join the Q&A, any question or comments. So I see Tarwat. Please go ahead, Tarwat, with your comment or question.
Yes, thank you, Liban, for your question. I am talking about Egypt. We have two strategies in Egypt to face this lack in internet with poor and developed area in Egypt. The first strategy is that the Ministry of Education tried to cover many schools in the village by the internet, and they give the secondary school students like tablet to use it in education and use the portal education and to learn more. The second strategy is that this partnership between the organization in Egypt and the Ministry of Education in Egypt, that the NGOs, local and national NGOs in Egypt, try to work together with the Ministry of Education to cover these areas that they have problems with the internet and this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Tarwat. Any other comment or question? I see Wilson Chacha. Please, Wilson, what is your question or comment?
No comment for now, no comments.
Okay, no, that is okay. Nice to see you. So I have a question for Malawi and for Madagascar. In the case of Malawi, do you use the past tense all the time? So schools were affected, were used as displacement shelters and all these kind of things. What is the situation now, Diniwe? What happened with those schools? They were already revealed because it had been a short period of time. Can you clarify this?
Yeah, the schools now are reopened, as I said, but there's still recovery work that is going on in those schools that were affected, especially on infrastructure and also provision of learning and teaching materials. So it was the cyclone Freddy, but it subsides now. Yeah, so we are in the recovery period.
And now, where are the people who used to be sheltered in those spaces?
The camps have been decommissioned, but yeah, so the Department of Disasters have declared that all camps should be closed. So people have gone back to their communities. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
And the schools now are free for learning because all the those that camped in the schools have been, the camps have been decommissioned, yes.
Okay. You want to comment on this, the same question? Are you still here, you get? I am not sure about that. Okay, if...
Oui, je suis là.
Oh, yes,
je suis là.
Please go ahead. Yeah.
Oui, je suis là. La question, c'est par rapport à la fermeture des écoles, c'est ça, hein?
Yes. And what happened with the people who were settled there temporarily? Can you hear me? Hello?
La situation, actuellement, la majorité des écoles sont toutes ouvertes, mais dernièrement, il y avait eu le retour de le cyclone Freddy. Les écoles ont été fermées pendant 2 jours. Les écoles ont été fermées pendant 2 jours. Mais le problème pour les écoles, après le passage cyclonique, les écoles servent d'abri pour les sinistrés. Et ça prolonge la privation de la continuité de l'apprentissage à l'école. Est-ce que je me suis bien expliquée? Vous êtes là, l'interprète?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Huguet. Okay, I see there are no more comments.
Mais aussi, il y a aussi les écoles détruites qui, il y a fait eu à l'année dernière, il y a fait eu des écoles détruites, mais qui ne sont pas encore rétablies, ce qui explique les sureffectifs dans pas mal beaucoup d'écoles à Madagascar.
Oh, thank you, Huguet. I see, Jennifer, you want to say something, a comment or question?
Sorry, thank you, Luis Eduardo. If time allows, I just also wanted to, I put this in the chat earlier, but I think with connectivity issues, I'm not seeing it anymore. One thing that policymakers ask us all the time, so this is a question for all of the speakers and participants, is recognizing limited funding and resources. If they have funding being put into climate, which aspects, which funds, and huge thanks to Anna Maria, who mentioned that the adaptation fund for climate adaptation specific funding, and it sounded like maybe there are some aspects there that could go towards climate smart education in a more integrated way. So please clarify if that's the case, and what other types of funds. Our colleagues earlier from Oxfam, for example, it sounded like mentioned what resources were funding the important work that's been mentioned today. So that would just be wonderful to better understand both what's working for people around the globe to access more funding, to proactively build stronger disaster risk reduction, to be ready for climate emergencies affecting education, and at the same time to be climate smart. And then also, from a policy change standpoint, are there aspects that should be changed that we can advocate around together to make it so that those pots of funding would work better for education goals as well as climate goals? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jennifer. This is a very huge question for probably another session, but I want to invite any colleague, maybe in 1 minute or to change something, but we will definitely make a note on that question because it's so important for everywhere. So yeah, anyone wants to make a comment from the speakers, or any other member, something you are aware of? Except that we are going to have this question for our next session. Oh, Ana Maria, go ahead.
Sure. I just wanted to quickly mention one of the other funds that is prominent globally for funding climate change adaptation is the Green Climate Fund. So, for example, we know that Save the Children works already quite a lot with that fund. And so that might be another one to explore further the kind of cross-sector approaches that might benefit education as well.
Thanks, Ana Maria, for sharing. Okay, it's time to just close the session because that we are in perfect timing today, indeed. Thank you very much, you all, for making time for this event. Thank you for joining the Global Campaign for Education in Emergency Learning community. And I want to invite you all to join us again on June 20 to celebrate for the very third consecutive year, the World Refugee Day. So we will be sharing the agenda very soon, and I hope to see you all in our next session. Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you to the speakers, thank you to the interpreters, and thank you to my colleagues Salma and Filani and all the rest of the team for their great support. Have a wonderful day, everyone.